What's up everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be answering the question, what is the best tire and wheel combination for the 3rd gen Tacoma? So if you don't have a 3rd gen or a Toyota, you have a different vehicle, hopefully this can kind of just give you a little bit more information so you can take that and apply it to your own vehicle. But I have seen this question pop up everywhere, almost every single day in the Toyota community, and especially with the 3rd gen. So I'm going to do my best to answer that today. I am on my 2nd set of wheels and tires, so I have a little bit of knowledge in this with getting the stance right and what I need to do in order to get it, perfect, not have any rubbing or anything like that. So I'm going to talk about basically 3 different stages. We're going to talk about the stock Tacoma, a Tacoma with a 3-inch lift, and then Tacoma with a 6-inch lift as well. So starting off with a stock truck, obviously mine isn't stock anymore, but I have a TRD off-road, which means that my stock were 265/70/16, measured 30.6 inches by 10.7. They weighed 35 pounds apiece. They could hold a wheel that was 7 inches wide to 9 inches wide. The wheel was 16/7. They had an offset of +25. The TRD Sports and the SR5s had 17-inch wheels. I would assume they are 7 inches wide as well. Now some other tires that you could put on a stock truck. Since I'm running a Nitto Ridge Grappler tire, all of these sizes are based off of the Nitto Ridge Grapplers. So if you're going with Toyos or another company, you can find tires that have a very similar spec to them. I did 1 tire for each size wheel. So I already said the 16s. On a 17, you could go to a 265/75/17, which measures 31.6 by 10.5. You could go 265/60/18, which is 30.5 by 10.7, or you could go 265/50/20, which is 30.4 by 10.9. So as you can see, all of these tires are relatively within the same size. If you do decide to change up the wheel size on the stock truck, I would suggest that you stay within a wheel that is 7 to 9 inches wide, which is what the stock tire was capable of holding. So that way you don't have the risk of any rubbing or anything like that. With a little bit wider wheel and the same size tire, you shouldn't have to worry about that. So that just goes over a little bit of information if you want to stay with the stock setup. Personally, I would recommend staying within those specifications. That way you can just stick with a factory normal setup. You don't have to worry about rubbing, you don't have to worry about different offset, there's no trimming or anything. Of course, there's going to be other options with different tire sizes. If you want to stuff a larger tire inside on a stock truck and you want to do all the trimming, great, go for it. But all of these recommendations are for keeping the truck in the factory specs. Now, if you're not familiar with our channel, keeping the truck as factory as possible is something that I like. With that being said, even though I do have all these modifications done to it, everything can go back to stock. So I'm not trimming or cutting up the truck to where I can't put it back to stock. Let's move on to the wheels and tires that I have on my 3rd gen Tacoma. This is the 2nd set, so I'm going to start off with the 1st set. I'll put up some pictures so you can see what that looked like. The very first set of wheels and tires that I put on, they were 33 by 12.5 with an 18-inch wheel. They measured 32.7 by 12.5 obviously. They weighed 72 pounds. The wheel size that the tires were rated for, you could go from 8.5 to 11, and they had a ply of 12, which I'll get to here later in this video. The wheels were 18 by 9 with a +10 offset. After having them on the truck is when I found out that they weighed the 72 pounds. They were a pretty heavy-duty tire, especially having a ply rating of 12. I went with a pretty beefy setup for the first set of wheels and tires. And with that being said, I still had 0 issues with any rubbing. I didn't have to do any trimming, any modifications. Everything on the inside here is still stock. I did have some rubbing back on the frame here if I was going off-road, but I didn't have to do the cab mount chop or anything like that. I had a lot of comments between the tire and the upper control arm. I had about a 1/4 inch of space. Even with the wheel turned, it doesn't rub the upper control arms. The upper control arms are stationary. They go up and down with the tire. So if you're going off-road and the wheel is going up and down, the upper control arm is going up and down as well, but that's as close as it ever got. So I had no rubbing or any issues like that, which was great. It was just something that I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't know exactly what I was doing. I knew I just wanted 33s, and with the wheels that I had, the 18 by 9, I was pretty lucky that they had a positive offset. So +10 was as high in the positive as I could have gone. If I did +20, it wouldn't have worked. But now let's talk about what you're looking at right now, my 2nd set of tires. These are 285/70/17s. They measure 33.1 by 11.8, so I got a little bit smaller tire. They weigh 66 pounds, so I saved a good bit of weight all around. Now, the wheels that I have are 17x9 with a 0 offset. So that means that they are 10 millimeters farther out from the truck than my previous wheels, which is why I have a little bit more clearance in between the tire and the upper control arm. This is a much better setup than the previous one that I had, simply because I have lighter tires, so I'm putting less stress on the engine. I have a lot more clearance. I have about an inch between the tire and the upper control arm because I went with a narrower tire. Had I kept the other tires that I had, I'd be very close on the inside, and I would have a lot of rubbing both in the front and in the back here, and especially on the cab mount, which I didn't want to cut up yet, because that's one thing that once you cut it, you're not going back to factory. So this is definitely a better setup as far as the fitment, even though both of them have no rubbing. I do have a slight bit of rubbing off-road, which is to be expected. But I think what would have made this stance just a little bit more aggressive is going to a negative offset now. So like I said, this has a 0. If I go to -6 or even -10, they're gonna stick out another 6 millimeters or another 10 millimeters, which would give me a little bit of rubbing. So this is a pretty good basic setup. There's not too much of an aggressive stance. They poke out just a little bit. I would like it to be a little bit more, but again, if you're not looking to trim, this is a perfect setup for this combination here. So that might help you if you're looking for a setup like this. You can use these numbers, the tire, the wheel size, the offset, everything like that, and spec it to, you know, the wheels and tires of your choosing. One thing that I want to touch briefly on is wheel spacers. Now, the reason that I bring this up is because a lot of people use them, a lot of people hate them, and there's almost a 50-50 line between using wheel spacers and not using wheel spacers. Now, there's an improper way to use wheel spacers, and there's a proper way to use wheel spacers. If you're going to be using them, that is something that I've contemplated with using on this setup that I have until I get a new set with the proper offset. Now, if you do the research, you get the right wheels, you can avoid wheel spacers altogether. That is the first option that I would choose. But from past experience, I had wheel spacers on my 2nd gen Tacoma, and I ran them off-road, on the highway. I had them on the truck for like 15,000-20,000 miles. I had 0 issues with them. So there's a correct way to do it. You need to make sure that they are hub-centric, which means there's a little lip in them. Make sure they have Loctite on them, they're torqued down to spec, along with your wheels, or the lugs on your wheels obviously, being torqued down to spec as well. So there is a correct way to do it. So talking about some other tires that you can do on the 3-inch lift, you could go with a 32.7 by 11.5 on a 17-inch wheel. You could do 33.8 by 11.2 on a 17-inch wheel, or 32.8 by 12.2 on a 16-inch wheel. All of these tires, again, are very similar to what I have. Of course, you could do other tires as well. You could go to 35s, you could even do 37s if you really hacked up the front of your truck. I think 35s would be cool to do at some point, but I'm just not to that level. I'm not to that commitment of doing more trimming or more cutting into the frame than I need to. Next up, we're gonna talk about a 6-inch lift. That is something that I don't recommend. Personally, I did it on my 2nd gen Tacoma, and that's the reason I had to sell it. It rode like crap, it messed up my truck, it broke CV axles left and right. It was a nightmare. You can go with 35-inch tires, you can go with 37-inch tires, and at that point, there's not a whole lot of rubbing really that you're gonna encounter, except for maybe on the cab if you go with a really wide tire and a really aggressive offset. I love the truck where it is right now. If I'm gonna trim and hack it up and put 35s on it, I'm gonna get way more ground clearance than a 6-inch lift with 35s. The next thing that I wanna cover is your wheel size and back spacing. Now, if you go with a really wide wheel, generally I would recommend you go with a little bit narrower tire. And the reason that you should do that is, again, staying within these specs, you don't wanna trim or do anything. The wider you go on the wheel, if you do a wider tire, it's just gonna make it poke out a little bit more. You will have to do a lot more trimming than if you go with a narrower tire. You should also try to stick with as close to the factory back spacing as possible, usually anywhere between 4 inches and 6 inches. Now, back spacing is the measurement from the hub to the innermost lip of the wheels. That's gonna put more of the tire inside your wheel well than outside. That's also related to the offset as well, but if you have a more narrow back spacing, so like 3 inches, you're gonna have less tire that's on the inside of the hub than you would with the factory back spacing. And to kind of piggyback off of that, we're gonna move on to offset. So offset is going to adjust how much that wheel is gonna stick out from the truck, how much it's going to kind of go into the truck as well. Let's say the middle of the tire is the hub assembly. So plus 25, is going to move the center of the wheel back just a little bit. So we're moving towards the upper control arm, we're moving towards the suspension and everything, and it's going to move just a little bit in. That's the center line of the wheel. Zero offset is obviously lined up, and then negative offset is going to bring the center of the wheel farther away from the hub. So offset is pretty important because that's going to give you basically the stance of what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish with your wheels. It can also kind of hurt you in a sense. Now the first set of wheels that I got had an offset of +10. If I had gone any higher in the positive direction than +10, let's say +15, even +20, I would not have been able to mount the wheels and tires onto the truck because the tire would have been up against the upper control arm, if not farther, which I know is impossible, but if you can kind of see that a little bit, that's how far in the tire would be. Now, if I had gone in the other direction and I had gone to -10, I would have had a ton of rubbing back here on the back side of the fender flare and even on the frame itself. So 100% I would have had to do the cab mount chop. Now with the current setup that I have, these are +0. So basically this means that my wheel, the center of my wheel, is 10 millimeters farther away from the truck than my previous setup. I have a little bit more space between the tire and the upper control arm. I would have had more rubbing on the back fender and on the frame itself if I kept the same tire. So by doing a 10 millimeter offset difference with these wheels, I moved them away from the upper control arm just a little bit. I went with a more narrow tire. That allowed me to have that clearance. So my stance is almost the same. I have the tire kind of pokes out the same. I just have less tire on the inside of the fender flare. And that's something that I didn't really like on that setup. Sure, I had a 12 and a half wide tire, but most of that tire was inside. You didn't even see it because the offset was not correct for that setup. If I wanted a really, really aggressive stance with that wide tire, having them poke out 2 or 3 inches from the fender flares, I would have had to go with a -10, maybe -15 offset to get that stance. My second set now, having +0, it's a step in the right direction, but my next set I definitely want to have a negative number without going crazy. If you've seen those huge, you know, dualies or full-size pickup trucks, their tires are sticking 4 or 5 inches out. I don't want that look. That's just not for me. That would be more of a -44 offset, just to give you guys a perspective, versus -6, -10 to -44. So moving on from that, the last thing that I want to touch base on is the ply for the tire. What are you going to be doing with your truck? Well, initially when I got my tires, I had no idea what the ply rating was. That's just not something that I looked into. I just knew I wanted a 33. So I saw 33, ordered it, and that's what I got. It wasn't until some people started making comments, why did you get a 12 ply tire on a mid-sized truck? So if you're unfamiliar with this, tires come in ply sizes. That's basically kind of like the durability, how thick they are, and they come in 2, 4, I think 6, but I know there's 8, 10, and 12, so kind of even numbers basically. And 12 is the highest ply rating that I've seen so far. Having a tire with a ply 12 is a heavy-duty, full-size truck. They're just going to be very capable of towing or, you know, using it on a work truck like that. Something though that was brought to my attention only by one person. One person made this comment and it stuck with me, and I appreciate whoever made that comment. Having a ply of 12 on a tire is fantastic for off-roading, because when you air down, you're gonna have a more durable tire with less air in it. It's gonna be less prone to getting punctured. So when you're off-road, you don't have to worry about, you know, climbing over a rock and it's gonna puncture your tire. If you had a ply of 2, you'd kind of be SOL. So I'm glad in that aspect I went with that, but with these tires I have a ply of 10. So I went a little bit less. I have a little bit less weight in the tire, but I still wanted to go with a good ply rating, so when I air down off-road, I don't have to worry about punctures as much because I still have a durable tire. Now, if you're not going to be airing down, you're not going off-road, maybe you're just going down dirt roads or something, you like to hunt, or even camping, you may not have to go with as high a ply rating. You could probably be safer with 6 or 8, something a little more standard than getting a really heavy-duty tire. So those are all factors that you have to consider when you're getting tires, when you're lifting your truck, what stance you're going for, what are you going to be using the truck for? Is it for show? Is it for off-road? Do you want to do a lot of trimming, not a lot of trimming? What do you want to do? There's a lot of factors that I'd never really thought of when I got my first set of wheels and tires. I just kind of put them on and hope that it worked, and I would say I got a little bit lucky with the first set, stuffing the largest tire that I could in there without having to do any trimming. But at the same time, I want to get a little bit more of an aggressive look, so I still have or had some research to do. This was kind of a baby step in the right direction, and now I know I'm going to do a little bit more aggressive and have the tires poke out, maybe go with a little bit wider tire again. If you have any other questions on wheels and tires, comment down below and I'll be sure to answer it. But again, if you enjoyed today's video, give it a huge thumbs up, smash that subscribe button. We also have merchandise, link in the description below. You can get a cool Tacoma t-shirt like I'm wearing today. It really helps us out when you guys check out our merchandise. That's gonna wrap it up. I'll see you guys in the next video.